Were you surprised that Republican senators issued this report?
Well, I know the senator who was the lead researcher on the report, Senator Ed McBroom. I've known him for about a decade now. He's very committed to integrity and to the truth. And look, frankly, anyone who's committed to those things will scrutinize and can scrutinize our election and find exactly what his report found. It confirmed what over 250 audits and countless election officials, numerous court opinions, and the majority of Michiganders also know to be true, that our election was secure, successful, and the results were an accurate reflection of the will of the people.
What about this question of the Attorney General conducting an investigation of the people lying about this?
Well, there's been a lot of questions and talk about election fraud and over the past several months, and I think it's important that the report makes clear the only fraud that really did occur in our election was the fraud lying and the misinformation about and misrepresentation about the truth and the integrity and security of our elections. And we want to be in a place where we don't have to continuously fight this battle of misinformation. And the only way to ensure that this doesn't repeat or escalate in the future is by having accountability. And so I think it's very important that the Attorney General look at ways to ensure justice is served and efforts to deceive and lie to the public about the sacredness of our democracy meet accountability. And there also can be accountability at the ballot box as well, that citizens can take on their own in future elections. But either way, we have to have clear accountability for those who are trying to deny the truth about our democracy if we want to ensure that this doesn't continue to escalate in the months and years ahead.
One of the people that this Republican Senate report went after in Michigan is the pillow guy, Mike Lindell. The report says Mr. Lindell claims that attacks by foreign and domestic enemies were successful in obtaining access to the computers containing results at local and county clerks' offices, as well as the Secretary of State. In some cases, the supposed access included the actual tabulators. However, this narrative is ignorant of multiple levels of the actual election process. And I have to say that sounds as if they are being as kind as they could to the pillow guy.
Truly. And again, speaking the truth and talking about the facts that we've known for months and spelling them out in a way that we hope more people will hear, including the legislators and lawmakers who continue to push for and promote legislation that responds to these types of conspiracy theories and lies, legislation that seeks to undo the very policies that led to our success, that led to so many people on both sides of the aisle voting and participating in democracy in 2020. And so, my hope is that the words in this report, like the ones you point out, lead to real action in responses from other leaders in the state Senate and in the state legislature, so that we can really put behind us these issues with regarding to undo the success of the 2020 election and move forward and work to build on that success and find ways to replicate the security and the access that we did so well in 2020.
It's very clear that Rudy Giuliani and the Trump people believed they could lie in any way they wanted to about what happened in Michigan. And that's something that we really haven't seen in the aftermath of an American election before. This belief that you can make up any number, you can tell any lie. There's no penalty for doing that. It's a desperate attempt to switch some sort of momentum in your direction. It always seemed both hopeless and insane. It wasn't going to have any effect. But what has it done to voters in Michigan and their understanding of their own system there?
What's really created a lot of division among citizens, a lot of confusion, which I think is part of the intent, and has caused, another piece of the intent is causes people to lose faith in their voice, in their vote, and in their democracy. And that causes them to disengage. And truly, a healthy democracy requires everyone to be engaged on both sides of the aisle, fully informed and active and having rightly placed faith that when they vote, their vote will be counted, and that the results of the election will be an accurate reflection of the will of the people. So we've confirmed that. We've reaffirmed that. This report again reaffirms that. What we now need to do is ensure that these pernicious lies promoted by bad actors, be they candidates or others who are unhappy with the results, seize and aren't repeated or escalated in future elections. And I think our focus needs to be on doing everything we can now to ensure that in next year's midterms elections, and certainly in the 2024 presidential, that we don't see an escalation or a repeat of those same tactics. And the only way we can do that is by really holding those bad actors accountable, which is why the decision today about Giuliani was so important.